Just to start off while the slides are coming up. So my name is Steve Kaiser. I work at the University of Bath. I timed this presentation last night. It took 30 minutes. So I've decided to cut it down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip over some of the details and give you the sort of take-home messages. And what I'm really looking for is for questions. I mean, you might ask a question I skipped over the slide and want to go back. That's absolutely fine. We can do that. We can dig into the details. Also, it's just possible that something I'm doing might resonate with something you're doing, so I might be able to give you advice. But equally, I'm really interested in your feedback. So if you're looking at what I'm doing and saying, I've got that, I've done it, you know, I've sorted it, please let me know. I'm really interested in connecting with people that have been doing some of the things. Or alternatively, you might be looking at some of the questions I've had and said that, you know, you need to ask this question. This is something that you might know about your course. So I'm looking for those sorts of things from you, where it resonates, or anything else that I could be doing that I haven't done yet. I've got a load of data on everything that I've been doing, and I'm showing you some of that. But there's probably questions I haven't asked and I could be asking, and you might spot some of those. Okay, well, I'll say a few things without slides then. So I'm trying to do two things. Firstly, I'm a big advocate of something called team-based learning. So who in this room knows what team-based learning is?
After yesterday's presentation, I do.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yesterday's presentation, I'm so delighted I told my wife this on the way home. You will not believe it. It's a high-flex conference, and the people who are advised doing team-based learning, my wife calls it TBFL, but so do I. So that's one thing I do. The other thing is I've been trying to build hybrid teaching as close as possible as I can get to HyFlex. It's not pure HyFlex. HyFlex is a platonic ideal, which is impossible to achieve, in my view. But I'm trying to do a hybrid experience, and I understand why.
We might need to present it like that, unfortunately.
Sorry?
The slideshow's not loading, unfortunately, so I might need to present it like that.
I might need to present it like this. Okay, so we're low-tech presentation. And quick, who has done some hybrid teaching? Oh yeah, so okay, so we're on the same board here. So let's. Oh, do I have to just sort of go down like this and then maybe like that? Okay. So this wonderful slide is going to be revealed in parts, but I shall just talk through it. This is why I'm interested in hybrid, because you know we should be doing hybrid because it's it delivers some kind of results, not just because it's a cool thing to do. There's inclusivity, working for different modes of engagement, widening participation. I think these are pretty familiar motivations for doing hybrid. There's also, I imagine, a number of us are sort of facing a finite campus and trying to expand and thinking about better and smarter ways of using campus. This thing down here is perhaps less obvious as a motivator, but I'm quite interested in, as part of my role, reducing the carbon impact reducing the climate impact of our teaching. So to my view, this isn't about stopping all in-person education. It's about trying to remove unnecessary commuting, and so saving that in-person time for when it's delivering real value. And potentially, yes, even not just maintaining the pedagogical outcomes, but even getting better. For example, building in hybrid team working skills that students can take with those into their professional working environment. So these are the reasons why I'm interested in doing hybrid. Team-based learning, I don't have time to tell you about exactly what team-based learning is. It's an active learning technique, as you heard yesterday. It takes advantage of what I slightly pretentiously call temporal and spatial synchronicity, which is students in the same place at the same time. To my mind, that's an opportunity, and I don't want to waste that opportunity just by talking at students. I want students working together on meaningful activities. So this is my students doing exactly that. And there is some evidence, as we heard yesterday, about about the efficacy of team-based learning, particularly for inclusivity. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make the two work nicely. I'm trying to make team-based learning work nicely with hybrid. And with a slight looking at a focus on peer learning as well. How is that sort of learning between students working well? So a couple of practicalities. One of the things that team-based learning does is, as we heard yesterday, it's obviously it's very team-based. So students are working together as teams and take an individual test. And this is a two-stage test. This is one of the things that they do. More importantly, you've got a group of students. These are all sort of made-up photos, and you've got to group them somehow. Okay, and so some of them turned up in class. Some of them are online. How are you going to group them into teams? And that's my key challenge. Now, the obvious thing to do is to have, well, everybody's in class. We put them in teams, one or more teams. Everyone online, we'll put those in one or more teams. So we have some teams that are in room and some teams that are online. Every team is what I would call homogeneous. It's either 100% in person or 100% online. And I had a cohort. I realized one of the things people were saying, it was this morning, is I should tell you something about my students. They're all master students. They come from all around the world. There's a cohort of about 85. So that's the size. And they're doing a kind of engineering management course. Engineering management for sustainable value, it's called. Anyway, so for this course, for the first 5 weeks, I had the students for 2 hours each week, and I did exactly this. Now, the problem is that if you don't necessarily know who's turning up online, then you may well need to shuffle the teams. And in fact, I did that quite deliberately to make sure that students could work with different students each week. So by the end of 5 weeks, they pretty much worked with everyone else in the cohort. The other thing you can do is you can have heterogeneous teams, which is to say some of the people in a team can be in person and some of them will be online. And if you want a permanent team, which team-based learning suggests, then you really have to accept that. And so, and this is what I did during week 6. So I have 5 weeks, 2 hours a week, and then week 6 it was intensive. So they were doing nothing else other than my course, full-time on my course. And at the start of the week, I put them in these teams and they stayed in the team until the end of the week and they did a summative team assessment. So that was the practicality. I also encouraged them, and one team did take advantage of this, which is I said, you can, if it's convenient to you, you can all meet up in one of your houses or in an accommodation downtown, for example, and sort of dial in. So you are kind of a remote team, but your team is in person, if that makes sense. So this is just summarising what I've done. I've got weeks 1 to 5, 2 hours each week, and we were taking these individual and team tests, the IRATs and TRATs in TVL methodology, which formative, but it gave me some interesting data, which I analysed. Week 6, they had an intensive time, and they did a summative team presentation at the end of week 6. I also opened up a peer evaluation, which I also analysed. And then week 10, so formal teaching is finished at the end of week 6, a couple of drop-in sessions, but nothing more than that. And then they had to turn in their individual assignment at the end of week 10, which I also looked at and saw whether there was any impact of online versus in person. I asked students a survey, which is based on a survey that based on this paper, which is about online study, and then I had a focus group as well last week, and personal reflection. So that's lots of data to go through, and this is the bit where I'm going to sort of just speed up by not going into the data in particular detail, but giving you the sort of the outcome of the data analysis. The first thing is we've heard a lot about, students need to be in person all the time. I hate anything online. I was thinking, well, I've given them the choice. They can be in person as much as they like. The orange bars at the top are the students, who were online each week. And so, it's always a minority, but there's always some students that are online. The grey bars, by the way, are students that sort of couldn't turn up at the start of semester often because they're wrestling with visa issues and such like, but they're all here by a bit later on. The one thing I did notice last week was this big, when I was looking through the data, this big sort of bulge in week 4. And so I asked the students, why is it? You were in person all the time except for week 4. What was it? And there was a big problem with the buses, and someone was waiting for almost an hour for a bus and bailed and went home. He said, I'm really grateful that I could still be part of the class. It was really interesting. It's stuff that we don't always see as instructors. So anyway, there is the message I take from that is there is a desire, even if you give people the chance to be online, for some students at least, for a variety of reasons, to engage remotely. So then the question is, all right, so if they're online, is that a problem? Is that kind of hurting them in assessment? And I looked at their tests, these formative tests that they're doing in weeks 1 to 5. I looked at their summative team presentation in week 6, and I looked at their individual assignment at the end of week 10. And here's where I'll just say that you could possibly see some differences, but there was no significant difference between online and in person. And so I then said, okay, well, what about the peer evaluations? There's a hypothesis that the in-person students will, think that everyone online is not really pulling their weight. And I looked at the evaluations that the in-person people were getting and the online people were getting. And there wasn't differences. There wasn't a significant difference between them. There appears to be a difference, but it's not significant. However, there is a difference with this third column. And I need to explain just briefly that for weeks 1 to 5, I was taking attendance registers. I was figuring out who was in person, who was online. Because week 6 was a bit more intensive, I actually relied on responses from the survey here. So I asked the students, were you in person or were you online for at least some of week 6? So these come from the survey. So obviously some people didn't answer the survey. And what I found that was interesting is that those people that didn't answer the survey did significantly worse in terms of peer evaluation. So these are the people that their peers thought were not being engaged. There's a correlation between not answering the survey and having peer evaluations. So mainly working hypothesis that it's not so much about whether you are in person or online, it's about how engaged you are with the course. This was quite interesting. I found that students, absolutely, the orange bar is their self-evaluation. I asked them to respond to how well they thought they'd done as a team. And perhaps unsurprisingly, everyone thought they'd done above average, right? So the one is kind of above average, and which clearly can't be the case. But again, when you compare that against what other people showed them, these are close. The in-person and online definitely thought that they were better than their peers, but not sort of on the border of significance. This one's really significant. So these are people, again, that hadn't answered the survey, so perhaps were less engaged students. What else does the data show us? How are we doing for time? Yeah, I'm all okay. And these students, again, drilling down on the students that didn't complete the survey, also did significantly worse in the end of semester evaluation. All right, so let's, one more bit of the quantitative data, and then I'll talk about the focus groups. Do online students get a good learning experience? Is it going to be an impoverished learning experience? And what I did here is I took this survey, asks a series of questions. I grouped those all together. And there are the next few slides show the sort of different groupings of the questions. And so what I did is I just counted up, how many people had said strongly agree, or to all of these. And the orange are the people that were online for at least some time between week 1 and week 6. and the blue are in person all the time. As the plot spoiler is there are no significant differences between in person and online. So the psychological motivation is, broadly speaking, did you like the hybrid classes? And broadly speaking, they did. So that was good. Peer collaboration. Did you find that you were working with others effectively? Broadly speaking, they were. Quite pleased with that too. Cognitive problem solving is, are you engaging with the classes? And again, broadly speaking, they are. Quite happy with that. Interactions with instructors, perhaps a bit more varied. Are they necessarily interacting with me or with my colleagues as an instructor? I don't actually mind if they're not interacting as much with me, as long as they're interacting with their peers, as long as they're getting that learning somehow. I'm less worried about that. Community support, do they feel a connection? Do they think that there's a sense of belonging? Again, pretty positive, quite happy with that. And the very last one was learning management. So do they feel that they have a good learning management system? They've removed distracting environmental factors, etc., etc. Bit more varied there as well. Refreshing amount of honesty, I thought. Okay, so that's all the quantitative data. I'm just going to finish off by talking about the qualitative, the focus group. So I did a focus group last week, small number of students. In general, the participants felt comfortable with hybrid working, particularly the hybrid participants. So that was nice. They were talking about flexibility, which you would expect, but also some other things like accessibility. The subtitles, particularly for those for whom English is not first language, like that. The people that didn't like it, interestingly, the people that didn't gave negative comments were, broadly speaking, the in-person. Sorry, this is a bit small, but I'll just read out a couple of things. It was interesting that some in-person students were making what I think were slightly judgmental comments, like people, when they're attending the lecture online from home, it says they're not taking it seriously, or they can't be bothered to get out of bed, said another student. Now, I don't know, maybe this is true, but it's a judgment that students have jumped to, I suspect, without checking whether they're right or not. And I thought that was quite interesting, slightly worrying. There's some obvious things about if people are a bit more introverted, it can be a bit harder to engage online. And this idea of building social capital, so the idea of needing to meet people face to face before you can interact with them effectively online. So then we said, how can we make it work better? Almost done. And it is interesting that an online student said it didn't work as brilliantly as I wanted with my team, but the team were trying, but they didn't really know how to integrate my contributions. So we've talked about a whole range of things in which to make it better. And the interesting thing I found about this, in fact, I think I put it on my last slide. I'll come back to this. Well, on the one hand, there's this worry that hybrid studying is a loss of engagement, student experience, learning gain or support, or peer support. Now, I'm not saying my study shows that there's no loss of these things, but let me put it in a different way. The study didn't show, evidence of any of those things, which is encouraging. Hybrid experience is generally welcomed by the students. The quality of hybrid experience, which I thought for me was a really interesting learning point, maybe it's obvious to all of you, depends at least in part on the in-person students, right? So it's not just about me, it's about the in-person students having a way of engaging the online students. And here's the thing, it was hardly ever about technology. I didn't get students saying, oh, you know, the audio didn't work, video didn't work. It wasn't, it was about the process of how do we engage, how do we bring in the online students, and culture. And those are the things I think I need to work on. And then finally, this idea, I found it really interesting talking to students in deeper terms, you know, a better understanding of this lived experience of studying hybrid will give deeper insights. Thank you to my colleagues. This is Benjamin, my postgraduate support, my two academic collaborators, Takari and Brian, and Rob Hyde, learning technologist, all instrumental in getting this to work. But thank you very much. If you have any questions, that'd be great.
Steve, thank you. Let's go to the floor first. Any questions, observations, queries, comments? Please.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's really interesting. You mentioned at the very beginning that one of your motivators was exploring hybridity for the sort of carbon question.
Yes.
Lower carbon impact. You don't seem to have included that as a question to your students. Do you have any thoughts on the implications of that?
Well, just to unpick what I mean by that, I suppose I'm talking about, you know, what you might call unnecessary commutes. Now, that could be anything from, if let's say a student only has one lecture that day, you know, it might be more efficient for them not to come in, but to dial in remotely for that one. But it could also be if students are ill, for example, or if they are possibly not even in the UK, right? You know, we had some students that were struggling to get their visa sorted out. I said, well, that's fine. You know, join in online sessions. So it's those sorts of things that we can cut down that travel where it's either impractical or unnecessary. Does that make sense? Okay.
If it doesn't answer the question, which is, I'll be rude.
That's
Which we're really interested in, yeah. So there's kind of scope for emissions that you're trying to implement. Did you mention that and discuss that with the students? Because actually, the in-person students, if they acknowledge that as part of what they've contributed to, is actually, you know, a kind of positive action by doing these hybrid sessions, then maybe you can have improved benefit stream and their perception of, oh, this is pretty cool actually, because we're saving the world.
So I have talked to students about it, but I'm a bit cautious about trying to tell students they shouldn't come to class, if you see what I mean. I don't want it to come across like that, because my students, it's like you study in the way that's best for you, and I will make it work for you. That's the general message I'm giving. They are aware that there's a carbon impact, and we've got some students working on the carbon impact of learning and teaching. But yes, I'm slightly cautious about going too far down that road with the students.
But I mean, you're not pushing it too hard, but just incorporate it in the feedbacks. You've got some sense of like, this is important to them.
Yeah. Did you ask them if they travelled in less as a result, or if they, you know, would have used their car more?
That's an example of a good question that I haven't answered. Anything else like that? Honestly, anything else that you think, oh, this would be interesting to find out? Let me know.
I mean, if you're purposefully putting hybridity and climate education together,
yeah,
it seems like you have permission to be explicit to your students about that particular point.
Yeah.
Let me put a context there as well. There are possibly in this room, there are some institutions, of course, which this academic year, for their mainstream cohort of students, have said there will be no hybrid. It will be face-to-face. And I know this in the Office for Students last year, that they contact, I think it was every vice chancellor that was contacted, and they sought assurances that unless it was a pre-approved online program or module, that it would actually be in person, face-to-face. So that's an interesting backdrop to that as well. So I don't know if other colleagues have had that in their institution.
It's very much true. If you participated in blended learning review, you've been under even closer scrutiny than those who did not. Genuinely, we've been given a list of things that we are to remedy purely because we volunteered to participate.
We live in interesting times. Can we just, were there any questions online, if I might, any questions online before we, so we've got some observations. There's the one about the, can't be bothered to get out of bed, quite direct feedback there. Although I will say that I think it was 3 years ago, I was participating in the preparation of a new programme with University of London, and I was ill. I was in bed. I didn't realise that the camera was on. I'm ready for that. I was just a muscle man, Superman. I turned it off quickly, but there was a little horror, which even when I put my clothes on, it's a little horror. So, have you developed a house design style?
Oh, no,
Oh, that's the
sorry,
previous
that was
one,
the previous
isn't
one.
it?
I think that was it.
That's it. Okay, fine. So, any final observations, colleagues? Okay, Steve, thank you so much.